Chef Marco was known around town for two things: his incredible risotto and his simmering, barely contained jealousy. He had a gift, no doubt. He could coax flavors out of ingredients that other chefs wouldn't even dream of combining. His little restaurant, Marco's Magnificent Meals, was a cozy place, always filled with the aroma of garlic, herbs, and simmering sauces. People raved about his food, especially the creamy, perfectly textured risotto that was his signature dish. But Marco wasn't satisfied. He craved more. He wanted the kind of fame and recognition that Chef Lorenzo had achieved seemingly overnight. Lorenzo's new restaurant, Bella Notte, was the talk of the town, a shining beacon of culinary innovation that drew crowds from miles around. Marco would sit in his own restaurant, watching the reservations slowly trickle in, while he knew Bella Notte was packed to the rafters every single night. It wasn't just the success that bothered Marco, it was the food. Lorenzo's menu was filled with dishes that Marco felt he should have created. Dishes that seemed to mock him with their simplicity and brilliance. There was the lemon pasta, so bright and zesty it made your taste buds sing. And the grilled octopus salad, tender and flavorful, a true masterpiece of seafood cookery. Marco could almost taste the missed opportunities, the ideas that had swirled in his own mind but never quite made it to the plate. The jealousy ate at him, a slow, burning ember that threatened to consume him entirely. He tried to ignore it, to focus on his own restaurant and his own customers. But the whispers of Bella Notte followed him everywhere. He'd overhear conversations at the market, snippets of praise for Lorenzo's dishes. He'd see articles in the local paper, glowing reviews that made his blood boil. He started spending his nights tossing and turning, unable to sleep. Visions of Lorenzo, smiling and successful, danced in his head. He imagined Lorenzo laughing at him, mocking his small restaurant and his magnificent meals. The jealousy twisted into resentment, and the resentment into a dark, dangerous idea. He had to do something. He couldn't let Lorenzo continue to bask in the spotlight while he remained in the shadows. He needed to even the playing field, to silence the whispers and extinguish the shining beacon of Bella Notte. The idea formed in his mind like a dark cloud, a desperate attempt to reclaim his place in the culinary world. It was a terrible idea, a reckless idea, but in Marco's jealous heart, it felt like the only way. Bella Notte. The name itself was like a taunt, a beautiful night that Marco would never experience. The restaurant was located in the heart of the city's culinary district, a prime location that Marco had coveted for years. It was a sleek, modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a glimpse into the bustling kitchen and the elegantly dressed diners. The interior was all soft lighting, polished wood, and crisp white tablecloths, a stark contrast to the cozy, slightly cluttered atmosphere of Marco's Magnificent Meals. But it wasn't just the location or the ambience that made Bella Notte so popular. It was the food. Lorenzo had a knack for creating dishes that were both innovative and comforting, familiar yet surprising. He used fresh, local ingredients, transforming them into culinary masterpieces that delighted the senses. His menu was a carefully curated selection of Italian classics with a modern twist, each dish a testament to his skill and creativity. There was the truffle risotto, richer and more decadent than anything Marco could imagine. The pasta was made fresh daily, each strand perfectly al dente and coated in a sauce that was both simple and sublime. The desserts were equally impressive, from the creamy tiramisu to the delicate panna cotta. And then there was the wine list, an extensive collection of Italian and international wines that perfectly complemented the food. But the dish that truly haunted Marco was Lorenzo's signature creation, the sea kiss. It was a simple seafood stew, but the flavors were so perfectly balanced, so incredibly fresh, that it tasted like the ocean itself. Marco had tried to recreate it, experimenting with different combinations of seafood and spices, but he could never quite capture the magic of Lorenzo's version. It was as if Lorenzo had a secret ingredient, a culinary spell that Marco couldn't break. The success of Bella Notte was undeniable. Every night, the restaurant was packed with diners eager to experience Lorenzo's culinary creations. Reservations were booked weeks in advance, and walk-ins were turned away with apologies. The restaurant had won numerous awards, and Lorenzo had become a local celebrity, his face gracing the cover of magazines and newspapers. Marco watched it all with a growing sense of despair. He felt like he was trapped in a nightmare, forced to witness Lorenzo's triumph while his own dreams withered and died. He knew that he was a talented chef, but he couldn't compete with the hype and the glamour of Bella Notte. He was stuck in his cozy little restaurant, serving his same old dishes to the same old customers, while Lorenzo was living the life he had always wanted. The jealousy gnawed at him, a constant reminder of his own perceived failure. It was a poison that was slowly consuming him, turning him into someone he didn't even recognize. The night was dark, a thick blanket of clouds obscuring the moon and stars. Marco checked his watch for what felt like the 100th time. 2:17 a.m. Perfect. The city was quiet, the streets mostly deserted. He'd spent weeks planning this, meticulously considering every detail, trying to anticipate any potential pitfalls. He'd told his sous chef he was visiting his sick aunt out of town. His phone was turned off and left at home. He wore dark clothing, a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, and gloves to avoid leaving any fingerprints. He walked the back alleys, sticking to the shadows, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. He clutched a small can of gasoline and his trusty lighter, a limited edition Zippo engraved with his initials, M.R. It was a gift from his father, something he always carried with him. He almost left it behind, knowing it could be traced back to him, but the thought of facing this night without it felt wrong, like a soldier going into battle without his weapon. He shoved it deep into his pocket, hoping his carefully laid plan would prevent him from needing to use it. Bella Notte loomed ahead, its darkened windows reflecting the faint glow of the streetlights. Marco approached cautiously, checking for any signs of life. The back door, he knew from his reconnaissance, was usually unlocked after the last employee left. He jiggled the handle, and to his relief, it opened with a soft click. He slipped inside, his senses on high alert. The kitchen was dimly lit by the emergency lights, casting long, eerie shadows across the stainless steel surfaces. The air was thick with the lingering aroma of garlic, herbs, and roasted meats, a cruel reminder of the culinary delights that were created within these walls. He found the deep fryer, a large, stainless steel vat filled with oil. This was it. The point of no return. He hesitated for a moment, his conscience warring with his jealousy. But the image of Lorenzo's smiling face flashed in his mind, and the resentment surged back with renewed force. He unscrewed the cap of the gasoline can and poured the contents into the fryer, the fumes filling the air with a pungent odor. He knew that grease fires spread fast. He just needed to ignite it and get out. He thought of the lighter in his pocket. Just a flick. A spark. Then he could be free. He told himself this was about his survival. He was a good chef, he told himself. He was so close. His hand trembled as he reached into his pocket and pulled out the lighter. The metal felt cold against his skin, a stark reminder of the heat he was about to unleash. He flipped open the top, the familiar click echoing in the silent kitchen. He hesitated again, his mind racing. Was this really the right thing to do? Could he live with the consequences? But then he pictured Lorenzo, accepting another award, basking in the adoration of the crowd. He imagined the satisfied smiles on the faces of the diners at Bella Notte, savoring the flavors of Lorenzo's culinary creations. The jealousy surged back, overwhelming his doubts. He had to do this. He had to stop Lorenzo. He flicked the flint wheel, and a small flame flickered to life. He held the lighter over the gasoline-soaked oil, his heart pounding in his chest. He took a deep breath and lowered the flame. Whoosh! The oil erupted in a ball of fire, flames leaping towards the ceiling, engulfing the fryer in an inferno. The heat was intense, searing his face. He stumbled backward, coughing and sputtering, his eyes watering. Panic seized him. The fire was spreading faster than he had anticipated. Smoke filled the kitchen, choking him. He turned and ran, desperate to escape the inferno he had created. He fumbled with the back door, his hands shaking so violently that he could barely grip the handle. He finally managed to open it and stumbled out into the alley, gasping for air. He ran as fast as he could, not stopping until he was several blocks away from Bella Notte. He paused, leaning against a brick wall, his chest heaving. He looked back in the direction of the restaurant, and saw the flames licking out of the windows, the sky above glowing orange with fire. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. He knew the fire department was on its way. He had to get out of here. He started running again, his mind racing. He had to get back to his restaurant, to establish his alibi. He had to act normal, as if nothing had happened. He reached his restaurant, his body aching, his lungs burning. He slipped in through the back door, relieved to find that his sous chef was still there, cleaning up for the night. "Marco. You're back early," his sous chef said, surprised. "How's your aunt?" She's doing better," Marco stammered, trying to control his breathing. "I decided to come back and help you close up." He forced a smile, trying to appear calm and collected. But inside, he was a mess, his mind consumed by the images of the fire, the sirens, and the knowledge that he had just committed a terrible crime. He thought he had gotten away with it. He thought he was free. He was so wrong. The sirens grew louder, a chorus of urgency cutting through the night. Fire trucks raced towards Bella Notte, their lights flashing, painting the streets in a kaleidoscope of red and blue. Neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion, their faces etched with concern. The fire department arrived within minutes, a team of firefighters leaping from the trucks, their faces grim. They quickly assessed the situation and began battling the blaze, hoses spraying powerful jets of water into the inferno. Smoke billowed from the windows, thick and black, obscuring the restaurant from view. News of the fire spread like wildfire through the local culinary community. Chefs and restaurant owners, alerted by phone calls and text messages, rushed to the scene, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. They watched in silence as the firefighters fought to contain the blaze, their hopes for Bella Notte slowly turning to ashes. Lorenzo, awakened by a phone call from his manager, arrived at the scene, his face pale and drawn. He stood across the street, watching his dream burn, his eyes filled with despair. He had poured his heart and soul into Bella Notte, transforming it from an empty space into a thriving restaurant that was loved by the community. Now, it was all going up in smoke. He watched as the firefighters finally managed to extinguish the blaze, the charred remains of his restaurant exposed to the night air. The kitchen, once a gleaming showcase of culinary innovation, was now a blackened shell, filled with debris and the acrid smell of smoke. The damage was extensive. The kitchen was completely destroyed, and the dining room had suffered significant smoke and water damage. It was clear that Bella Notte would be closed for months, maybe even longer. As the firefighters began clearing the scene, police officers cordoned off the area, preventing anyone from getting too close. They began interviewing witnesses, trying to piece together what had happened. Detective Rossi arrived on the scene, his face grim. He was a seasoned investigator, known for his sharp mind and his ability to solve even the most complex cases. He surveyed the scene, his eyes scanning the debris, searching for any clues that could help him identify the arsonist. He knew that this was no accident. This was a deliberate act of destruction, fueled by jealousy and hatred. He also knew that he would find the person responsible. It was just a matter of time. The smell of burnt grease hung heavy in the air. Detective Rossi started his investigation, determined to find the truth behind the ashes of Bella Notte. He was about to discover a secret, hidden in plain sight. Detective Rossi was a man of quiet observation. He wasn't the type to yell or intimidate. His methods were more subtle, more precise. He believed that everyone, even the most hardened criminals, had a breaking point. It was just a matter of finding it. He had seen it all in his years on the force. He had investigated robberies, assaults, and even murders. He knew the dark side of humanity, the depths to which people could sink when driven by greed, anger, or desperation. He was a master of deduction, able to piece together seemingly insignificant details to form a complete picture. He had a knack for spotting inconsistencies, for noticing things that others overlooked. He was like a human lie detector, able to sense when someone was being dishonest. He was also a patient man. He knew that investigations took time, that it was important to gather all the facts before drawing any conclusions. He was willing to put in the hours, to follow every lead, no matter how small. He arrived at the fire scene with a clear mind, ready to begin his investigation. He started by interviewing the firefighters, asking them about the nature of the fire, where it had started, and whether they had noticed anything unusual. They told him that the fire had started in the kitchen, near the deep fryer. They also mentioned the strong smell of gasoline, which immediately raised a red flag. Detective Rossi then spoke with Lorenzo, the owner of Bella Notte. Lorenzo was distraught, his voice trembling as he described his restaurant and his dreams. He couldn't imagine why anyone would want to hurt him. "I don't have any enemies," Lorenzo said, his eyes filled with tears. "I just wanted to create a place where people could enjoy good food and good company." Detective Rossi listened patiently, offering words of comfort. He knew that Lorenzo was telling the truth. He was a good man, a hard-working chef who had built his restaurant from the ground up. But Detective Rossi also knew that sometimes, the most obvious answers were the most deceptive. He decided to dig a little deeper, to investigate Lorenzo's background and his relationships with other chefs in the area. He asked for a list of Bella Notte's employees and suppliers. He wanted to know everything about Lorenzo's life, both personal and professional. He knew that the arsonist was out there, watching, waiting. He knew that he had to be careful, that one wrong move could jeopardize the entire investigation. He took a deep breath and began his search. He started with the debris near the fryer. The first discovery came quickly. He saw something glinting in the soot. It was metal. He reached down and carefully picked it up. It was a lighter. A Zippo lighter. And it had initials engraved on it, M.R. Detective Rossi's eyes narrowed. This was it. The first piece of the puzzle. Now, all he had to do was figure out who M.R. was. Back at Marco's Magnificent Meals, Marco was struggling to maintain a facade of normalcy. He helped his sous chef clean up, wiping down tables and scrubbing the grill, but his mind was miles away, replaying the events of the night in his head. He kept glancing at the news, waiting for the first reports of the fire to surface. He knew it wouldn't be long before the story broke, and he wanted to be prepared. He forced himself to eat something, but his appetite was gone. The food tasted like ash in his mouth. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that someone knew what he had done. He tried to convince himself that he had gotten away with it, that no one would ever suspect him. But deep down, he knew that he was living on borrowed time. The guilt was eating at him, slowly but surely. He finally finished his shift and went home, his mind racing. He tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. Every creak and groan of the house sounded like footsteps, every shadow seemed to conceal a hidden threat. He knew that he had to do something, that he couldn't just sit around and wait to be caught. He considered leaving town, disappearing without a trace. But he knew that wouldn't solve anything. He would always be looking over his shoulder, haunted by his crime. He thought about confessing, turning himself in to the police. But the thought of spending years in prison terrified him. He couldn't imagine being locked away, separated from his restaurant, his life. He was trapped, caught between his guilt and his fear. He didn't know what to do, where to turn. Meanwhile, Detective Rossi was already hard at work, piecing together the puzzle. He started by running a search for M.R. in the local business directory. He quickly found a match, Marco Rossi, owner of Marco's Magnificent Meals. Detective Rossi's eyes lit up. It was too much of a coincidence. He decided to pay Marco a visit. He drove to Marco's restaurant, his mind already formulating a plan. He wanted to see Marco's reaction, to gauge his level of guilt. He knew that Marco would be nervous, but he had to be careful not to reveal too much. He parked his car across the street and watched the restaurant for a few minutes, observing Marco's movements. He saw him wiping down tables, talking to his sous chef, trying to appear normal. Detective Rossi took a deep breath and got out of his car. He walked across the street and entered Marco's magnificent meals, his eyes scanning the room. Marco looked up, his face paling slightly as he saw Detective Rossi approaching. He tried to smile, but his lips trembled. "Can I help you, officer?" Marco asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Detective Rossi," he said, flashing his badge. "I'd like to ask you a few questions about the fire at Bellinate." Marco's face drained of all color. He knew this was it. His carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. The heat was on. "The fire at Bellinate was a terrible tragedy," Marco said, trying to sound sincere. "Lorenzo is a good man, a talented chef. I can't imagine who would want to do something like that." Detective Rossi studied Marco's face, his eyes unwavering. He noticed the slight tremor in Marco's hands, the beads of sweat on his forehead. He knew that Marco was lying, but he needed to give him enough rope to hang himself. "We're just trying to gather information," Detective Rossi said, his voice calm and reassuring. "We're talking to everyone who knew Lorenzo, everyone who might have had a reason to want to hurt him." "I didn't have any reason to hurt Lorenzo," Marco protested, his voice rising slightly. "We were competitors, yes, but we were also friends. I admired his work, his creativity." Detective Rossi raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. "Is that so?" he asked. "You admired his work? Even the sea kiss?" Marco's eyes flickered for a moment, a brief flash of anger betraying his carefully constructed facade. "The sea kiss is a good dish," he said, his voice tight. "But I could have created it myself. I had the idea first." Detective Rossi smiled, a subtle, almost imperceptible expression. "Did you now?" he asked. "That's interesting. Because we found something at the scene of the fire. Something that might be of interest to you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small plastic bag. Inside, nestled in a bed of cotton, was the Zippo lighter, its engraved initials glinting in the light. Marco's face went white. He stared at the lighter, his eyes wide with disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Detective Rossi held up the bag, his eyes fixed on Marco's face. "Do you recognize this, Mr. Rossi?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. Marco swallowed hard, his throat dry. He knew that he was caught, that there was no way out. He looked at the lighter, then at Detective Rossi, then back at the lighter. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. "Yes," he whispered. "I recognize it." Detective Rossi leaned forward, his voice barely audible. "Whose lighter is it, Mr. Rossi?" he asked. Marco opened his eyes, his face etched with despair. He knew that he had reached his breaking point, that he could no longer deny the truth. "It's mine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's my lighter." Detective Rossi nodded, his expression unchanged. "And how did your lighter end up at the scene of the fire, Mr. Rossi?" he asked. Marco hesitated for a moment, then sighed. He knew that the game was over. He had lost. I dropped it," he said, his voice trembling. "I was there that night, but I didn't start the fire. I swear." Detective Rossi smiled. "We'll see about that, Mr. Rossi," he said. "We'll see about that." He knew he was close to the truth, he could almost taste the confession. It was time to turn up the heat. The show was about to begin. Detective Rossi led Marco to a small, windowless interrogation room. The room was sparsely furnished, with only a table and 2 chairs. The walls were painted a dull gray, and the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee. He motioned for Marco to sit down, then took a seat opposite him. He placed the plastic bag containing the lighter on the table between them. "So, Mr. Rossi," Detective Rossi began, his voice calm and measured. "You say you dropped your lighter at the scene of the fire. Can you tell me how that happened?" Marco hesitated for a moment, his mind racing, trying to come up with a plausible explanation. I don't know," he stammered. "I must have dropped it without realizing it." "And what were you doing at Bella Notte so late at night, Mr. Rossi?" Detective Rossi asked, his eyes fixed on Marco's face. Marco swallowed hard, his throat dry. I was taking a walk," he said. "I couldn't sleep. I often take walks late at night." "A walk that just happened to take you past Bella Notte?" Detective Rossi asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "Yes," Marco said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a nice neighborhood. I like to walk there." Detective Rossi leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Mr. Rossi," he said, his voice low and intense. "I don't think you're being entirely honest with me." Marco's face went pale. He knew that Detective Rossi didn't believe him, that he was just playing with him, waiting for him to crack. "I'm telling you the truth," Marco insisted, his voice trembling. "I swear. I didn't start the fire." Detective Rossi sighed, his expression unchanged. "Mr. Rossi," he said, "we have evidence that suggests otherwise. We know that you were at the scene of the fire. We know that you had a motive. And we know that you're lying to me right now." Marco's heart sank. He knew that he was trapped, that there was no way out. He looked at Detective Rossi, his eyes filled with despair. "What kind of motive could I have?" Marco asked, his voice barely audible. Detective Rossi leaned back in his chair, his eyes unwavering. "Jealousy, Mr. Rossi," he said. "Pure, simple jealousy. You were jealous of Lorenzo's success, of his talent, of his restaurant. You wanted to take it all away from him." Marco's face flushed with anger. "That's not true," he protested. "I wasn't jealous of Lorenzo. I admired him." Detective Rossi smiled, a cold, humorless expression. "Is that so, Mr. Rossi?" he asked. "Because we've spoken to several people who say otherwise. They say that you were obsessed with Bella Notte, that you couldn't stop talking about it, that you were consumed by jealousy." Marco's world was spinning. He couldn't believe that his carefully constructed lies were falling apart so quickly. He knew that he had to say something, to do something, to salvage the situation. "They're lying," he said, his voice desperate. "They're trying to frame me. I didn't do it." Detective Rossi shook his head, his expression pitying. "It's over, Mr. Rossi," he said. "It's time to tell the truth." Marco stared at Detective Rossi, his eyes filled with fear and despair. He knew that he had reached the end of the line. He had no choice but to confess. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "Okay," he said, his voice barely audible. "Okay, I'll tell you everything." The truth was about to come out. Marco took a shaky breath and began to speak, his voice low and raspy. I went to Bella Notte that night," he admitted. "I wanted to. I wanted to see if I could figure out what Lorenzo's secret was. What made his restaurant so popular?" Detective Rossi listened patiently, his expression neutral. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer any encouragement. He just let Marco talk, allowing him to unravel his own story. "I knew that the back door was usually unlocked," Marco continued. "So I slipped inside. I was just going to take a look around, to see if I could find anything that would explain Lorenzo's success." "And what did you find, Mr. Rossi?" Detective Rossi asked, his voice soft but probing. Marco hesitated for a moment, then swallowed hard. "Nothing," he said. "I didn't find anything. I was just about to leave when When I smelled gasoline. Detective Rossi raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. Gasoline, Mr. Rossi? He asked. That's an interesting detail. Because we found traces of gasoline near the deep fryer. Marco's face went pale. He knew that he was digging himself deeper and deeper into a hole, but he couldn't stop. He had to keep talking, to try to convince Detective Rossi that he was innocent. I don't know anything about gasoline, Marco said, his voice trembling. I just smelled it. It was very strong. And what did you do then, Mr. Rossi? Detective Rossi asked, his voice calm and measured. I panicked, Marco said. I was afraid that something was going to happen, that there was going to be an explosion. So I ran. I ran as fast as I could. And in your haste, you just happened to drop your lighter near the deep fryer? Detective Rossi asked, his voice laced with skepticism. Marco nodded, his eyes filled with tears. Yes, he said. I dropped it. I didn't even realize it was gone until you showed it to me. Detective Rossi leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Marco's face. Mr. Rossi, he said, his voice low and intense. I don't believe you. I think you're lying to me. I think you went to Bella Notte that night with the intention of starting a fire. I think you were jealous of Lorenzo, and you wanted to destroy his restaurant. Marco shook his head, his eyes filled with despair. No, he said. That's not true. I would never do anything like that. Detective Rossi sighed, his expression unchanged. Mr. Rossi, he said, we have evidence that suggests otherwise. We have witnesses who say that you were obsessed with Bella Notte, that you couldn't stop talking about it, that you were consumed by jealousy. We have your lighter, found near the scene of the fire. And we have your own admission that you were at Bella Notte that night. All the pieces fit, Mr. Rossi. All the pieces point to you. Marco stared at Detective Rossi, his eyes filled with fear and despair. He knew that he had reached the end of the line. He had no choice but to confess. Okay, he said, his voice barely audible. Okay, you're right. I did it. The confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The truth was finally out. Detective Rossi leaned forward, his eyes piercing. Tell me what happened, Marco. Tell me everything. Marco hung his head, shame washing over him. I was jealous of Lorenzo, he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. He was so successful, so talented. Everyone loved his restaurant. I felt like I was living in his shadow. So you decided to do something about it? Detective Rossi prompted, his voice calm but firm. Marco nodded, tears streaming down his face. I wanted to hurt him, he said. I wanted to take away everything that he had. I wanted him to feel the same pain that I was feeling. So you went to Bella Notte that night with a can of gasoline in your lighter? Detective Rossi asked, his voice relentless. Marco nodded again, his body shaking uncontrollably. Yes, he said. I poured the gasoline into the deep fryer and lit it with my lighter. I wanted to destroy his restaurant, to ruin his life. And then you ran? Detective Rossi asked, his voice unwavering. Marco nodded, his face buried in his hands. Yes, he sobbed. I ran. I was so scared. I didn't know what I had done. Detective Rossi sighed, his expression unchanged. Mr. Rossi, he said, you committed a serious crime. You endangered the lives of innocent people. You destroyed a successful business. And you did it all because of jealousy. Marco looked up, his eyes filled with remorse. I know, he said. I know I did a terrible thing. I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. Detective Rossi stood up, his expression stern. I'm afraid that's not up to me to decide, Mr. Rossi, he said. You're under arrest for arson. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As Detective Rossi recited the Miranda rights, Marco sat in stunned silence, his mind reeling. He couldn't believe that his life had come to this, that he had thrown everything away because of his jealousy. He thought about Lorenzo, about the pain and suffering he had caused. He knew that he could never make amends for what he had done. He also thought about his own restaurant, about his sous chef, about his customers. He knew that he had let them all down, that he had betrayed their trust. As he was led out of the interrogation room in handcuffs, Marco knew that his life would never be the same. He had made a terrible mistake, a mistake that would haunt him for the rest of his days. The fire at Bella Notte had not only destroyed a restaurant, it had also destroyed his life. It was all over. The grease fire was still smoldering, and Marco's life had been extinguished. The sound of the sirens faded into the distance as Detective Rossi closed the door, another case closed. It was a sad end, but justice had been served. The arrest of Chef Marco sent shockwaves through the culinary community. The news spread quickly, leaving chefs and restaurant owners stunned and dismayed. Many had known Marco for years, admired his talent, and enjoyed his company. They couldn't believe that he was capable of such a destructive act. Lorenzo, devastated by the fire and the revelation of Marco's betrayal, was left to pick up the pieces. Bella Notte was in ruins, his dreams seemingly shattered. He spent the days following the fire sifting through the debris, salvaging what he could, and trying to make sense of what had happened. The insurance company assessed the damage, estimating the cost of repairs to be hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was clear that Bella Notte would be closed for a long time, perhaps permanently. But Lorenzo was not one to give up easily. He had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let his dream die. He resolved to rebuild Bella Notte, to create something even better than before. He started by meeting with his employees, assuring them that he would do everything in his power to get the restaurant back on its feet. He promised to find them temporary jobs, to help them make ends meet while they were out of work. He also reached out to the local community, seeking their support. He was overwhelmed by the outpouring of sympathy and offers of help. Chefs offered to host fundraising dinners, suppliers offered discounts on equipment and ingredients, and volunteers offered to help with the cleanup. Lorenzo was touched by the generosity of others. He realized that he wasn't alone, that he had a community of friends and supporters who believed in him and his dream. He spent weeks working with architects and contractors, designing a new and improved Bella Notte. He wanted to create a space that was not only beautiful and functional but also a symbol of hope and resilience. He also spent time reflecting on what had happened, trying to understand Marco's motives. He couldn't comprehend why someone would be driven to such extremes by jealousy. He realized that jealousy was a destructive force, a poison that could consume even the most talented and successful people. He resolved to never let jealousy cloud his own judgment, to always be grateful for what he had, and to support others in their own pursuits. As the rebuilding of Bella Notte began, Lorenzo felt a sense of renewed hope. He knew that it would be a long and difficult journey, but he was determined to succeed. He was determined to turn the ashes of Bella Notte into something beautiful, something that would inspire others to pursue their dreams, no matter how difficult the challenges. The community was behind him, ready to help. And Lorenzo was ready to build. Years passed. Marco sat in his small cell, the walls closing in on him. He had plenty of time to reflect on his actions, on the destructive power of jealousy, on the terrible mistake he had made. He thought often of Lorenzo, wondering if he had managed to rebuild Bella Notte. He hoped so. He hoped that Lorenzo had found success and happiness, despite the pain that he had caused. He also thought about his own restaurant, Marco's magnificent meals. He wondered if it was still open, if his sous chef had managed to keep it afloat. He imagined the aroma of garlic and herbs, the laughter of his customers, the warmth of the kitchen. It was a world that he had lost, a world that he could never reclaim. He received occasional visits from his lawyer, who kept him informed about the progress of his case. He was eventually convicted of arson and sentenced to a long prison term. He accepted his fate, knowing that he deserved it. He spent his days reading, writing, and trying to make amends for his past mistakes. He volunteered to work in the prison kitchen, helping to prepare meals for the other inmates. He found a sense of purpose in serving others, in using his culinary skills to bring a little joy into their lives. He also started writing letters to Lorenzo, expressing his remorse and asking for forgiveness. He didn't expect a response, but he felt compelled to reach out, to try to make some amends for the pain that he had caused. One day, a letter arrived from Lorenzo. Marco's heart skipped a beat as he opened it. He read the words carefully, his eyes filling with tears. Lorenzo wrote that he had rebuilt Bellinate, that it was even more beautiful and successful than before. He also wrote that he had forgiven Marco, that he understood the power of jealousy, and that he hoped that Marco could find peace and redemption. Marco was overwhelmed by Lorenzo's kindness and compassion. He realized that forgiveness was possible, even for the most terrible crimes. He resolved to spend the rest of his life trying to be a better person, to honor Lorenzo's forgiveness, and to make amends for his past mistakes. Outside the prison walls, Bellinate shone brightly, a beacon of hope and resilience. Lorenzo had turned the ashes of destruction into a symbol of triumph, a testament to the power of the human spirit. He had proven that even the most devastating tragedies can be overcome, that even the deepest wounds can be healed. And he had shown Marco the true meaning of forgiveness. The fire was out, but the lessons learned would burn forever. The story of Marco and Lorenzo serves as a powerful reminder of the destructive nature of jealousy and the importance of handling rivalry with grace and integrity. Jealousy, like a fire, can consume everything in its path, destroying not only the object of envy but also the person who harbors it. It can cloud judgment, distort reality, and lead to acts of unimaginable cruelty. In Marco's case, his jealousy of Lorenzo's success blinded him to his own talents and achievements. He became so fixated on what he didn't have that he failed to appreciate what he did. He allowed his envy to fester, poisoning his mind and leading him down a path of destruction. The story also highlights the importance of handling rivalry with grace and integrity. Competition can be a healthy motivator, pushing us to strive for excellence and to reach our full potential. But when competition turns into envy, it can become toxic, leading to resentment, bitterness, and ultimately, destructive behavior. Lorenzo, on the other hand, serves as an example of how to handle rivalry with grace and integrity. He admired Marco's talent, even as he surpassed him in success. He never let jealousy cloud his judgment, and he always treated Marco with respect and kindness. His ability to forgive Marco, even after such a devastating betrayal, is a testament to his strength of character and his commitment to compassion. He understood that holding on to resentment would only perpetuate the cycle of pain and destruction. By choosing forgiveness, he not only freed himself from the burden of anger but also offered Marco a chance at redemption. The story of Marco and Lorenzo is a cautionary tale, a reminder that true success is not measured by external achievements but by the quality of our character and the way we treat others. It is a reminder that jealousy is a dangerous emotion that can lead to devastating consequences, and that forgiveness is a powerful force that can heal even the deepest wounds. It teaches us that it is important to celebrate the successes of others, to learn from their achievements, and to strive for excellence in our own pursuits, without allowing envy to poison our hearts. Ultimately, the story of Marco and Lorenzo is a story of hope and resilience, a story that reminds us that even in the face of tragedy, it is possible to rebuild, to forgive, and to find redemption. It teaches us that the human spirit is capable of overcoming even the most difficult challenges, and that even the darkest moments can be followed by the light of hope and forgiveness. Bellinate stands tall, a testament to resilience and a reminder that even from the ashes of jealousy, beauty and forgiveness can rise.